IFP President Velenkosini Hlabisa says the party will use its position in the government of national unity to continue calling for South Africans to be put first. Delivering a keynote address at the party's 50th anniversary celebrations, Hlabisa says those who are in the country legally and lack specialized skills should be sent back home. Here for some analysis now on the anniversary and Hlabisa's address, I'm joined by Professor Richard Pithouse, a research fellow at the Global Center for Advanced Studies work. Prof, good to have you. Thank you very much for your time once again.
Always a pleasure.
Let's firstly look at the fact that, 20 minutes of the 30 or 4 minutes of that address would have involved him looking back at the history of the organization, but much of the organization still has that towering stature of Mangosuthu Buthelezi.
Well, it began as a personality cult, amongst other things, so it's hardly surprising. I mean, we all know that, after Mangosuthu Buthelezi had passed on, election posters still carried pictures of him. That's extremely unusual. Political parties in most of the world, most of the time, would look forward. But this is one of those cases where the party is so, its image is so overdetermined by that of its founder that they tend to look back in that way.
It's because it has no ability to be able to embrace that history, but bring in very strongly and firmly the new generation and what they stand for, like Hlabisa himself.
There are no people in the party who are really national figures of significant import. There's no one with real charisma. And they do trade a lot on that past.
Yeah. Let's revisit some of the things that he would have highlighted as the legacy of this organization that they would then begin to build on. Of course, putting them at the Jabulani Amphitheatre and saying this is where most of these would have actually been birthed. For example, founding the organization on the pillars of the ANC, saying Mangosuthu Buthelezi was very clear on that day at the amphitheatre in 1975 to say that this organization is really founded on the pillars of the ANC, that they support the armed struggle, that they were the founding members that would make up the CODESA, for example, conversation, and that they were for the release of exiles, the unbanning of political organization and so forth. Are these facts that are entrenched in South Africa that work in the favor of the IFP?
That's an opportunistic misreading of history that does draw on some facts but leaves out a lot of others and misrepresents some. Of course, history worked out in a way that what is now the IFP has to accommodate itself to. So it does tend to play up this claim that, Nkatha, as it was prior to 1994, was a kind of internal protagonist in the wider struggle, that it does have these roots in the ANC and so on. But that isn't the truth. And I think anyone who was there or anyone who knows history can only agree with that.
Yeah, it's a past that many, I suppose, would want to contest, but they continue to say, well, our legacy is that of justice, is that of peace, is that of fairness. I mean, are those the strength of the IFP?
Today, the IFP, not unlike some other parties, tends to speak, at least formally and publicly, in a way that is really just a string of cliches. Some of them are liberal, some of them are more typical of conservative parties around the world, put South Africans first, the xenophobia. I mean, that's what we see amongst right-wing parties all over the world. But they cannot credibly claim to have been a party that in the past was for things like peace and justice. Their complicity with the apartheid system is undeniable. That's ideologically, in terms of its administration, and especially after 1983, when the UDF was formed and you began to get a real mass resistance to apartheid here, there imbrication in what became very, very violent repression of that struggle. You know, some of their people were sent to the Caprivi Strip in 1986 to be trained by the apartheid military. They came back, along with day-to-day kind of violence and intimidation. There were all of those notorious massacres, Kwamakuta, Trust Feeds, Sebokeng, later Boy Patong. These are simple historical facts. I know that the IFP just deny them. It's a strategy. You know, you just deny, in the same way that if you ask a spokesperson for the Israeli state about what's happening in Palestine, they'll just come with a line and just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. But constant repetition doesn't make something true.
Now, he makes a statement which I'm sure it will raise a lot of questions to many people. He says, the IFP is the only political party that has remained in the country for 50 years pushing the struggle. He says, yes, the ANC is over 100 years old, but part of those 100 years, they were not in the country. We are the only political party that has constantly been in the country pushing the struggle for 50 years.
Well, that is true, but it's not like the ANC chose to leave the struggle. They had to go into exile and underground because they were banned. So I don't really see what the particular salience of that fact is, but that fact is a true fact.
Yeah, that he says then, therefore, we've remained relevant for 50 years.
What does relevance mean? I mean, in terms of national politics, they have a minuscule support base. They are certainly politically relevant in KwaZulu-Natal, no question about that. And following the collapse of support from the ANC, they've been able to exercise power again, obviously through a coalition in the provincial government. So participation in government, if that's relevance, then yes, they do have some relevance. But just being around for a long time doesn't make you relevant.
Yeah.
And not unlike a number of other parties, you know, they don't bring anything new in terms of the discourse, in terms of the ideas. It's not unique to them. I mean, what has Build One South Africa ever said that was original or that ever spoke to our multiple crises in a way that brings some energy and vision? You know, there's a number of parties that just repeat cliches.
Yeah. Let's look at that. I mean, as you put it, they parade a couple of mayors, deputy mayors, probably largely in KwaZulu-Natal, but pointing out to say, well, we are strong in KwaZulu-Natal, admittedly so, saying, but we are making an impact in Gauteng, for example. If you look at the city of Johannesburg, we've got our MEC there in Human Settlement. We are certainly making an impact at the legislature level. We've got a representative there. He points to himself and saying, the GNU, I am there, I'm driving reforms in local government. You've got Mkhuleko Hlengwa there, he's driving reforms in public transport. Are they making significant policy insertions in those spaces where they are, that are significantly driving the reform that they say?
Well, of course, you know, coalition politics allows even very small parties to negotiate positions of influence on the back of, you know, minimal voter support. They do have all of those positions. You know, different individuals may be conducting themselves differently in different positions in different places. But there's no question that the IFP has not brought any new vision to the fore. As I said just now, that's not unique to them. Our politics generally lacks imagination. It's generally a repetition of tired, exhausted, unoriginal ideas with, you know, accompanied by forms of populism that are challenging that, but sometimes in dangerous ways, sometimes in incoherent ways. The IFP's formal discourse sits squarely in that exhausted mainstream that certainly does not speak to the severity of our crisis.
Yeah. So for you, him highlighting the immigration situation, South Africans first, close the borders to those who are not rescuers and so on and so forth, is not a new rhetoric for the IFP.
It's not new for the IFP, it's not new for Action SA, it's not new for the DA, it's not new for MK, although MK would say it in a much more extreme way, as would Gayton McKenzie's party. Yeah. But this is what centre and right-wing parties do all over the world. They deflect. Instead of saying, look, let's take serious measure of the depth of our problems, let's have real discussions about how we can address them, they just deflect and scapegoat and say, well, let's blame a vulnerable minority. We've got incredibly serious problems like mass youth unemployment, up to 70% by some counts. 20% of families don't have enough food. The infrastructure in Johannesburg is falling apart. It's a complete lack of political imagination.
If they were, as they mark their anniversary, find this moment as a significant political moment, participating at national, participating at provincial, participating at local government, what would they need to still do in terms of the substantial challenges that the party faces of reconciling that proud history, the demands of contemporary politics? What would they need to do?
Well, look, the average voter in South Africa is a young person. What happened in 1983, say, at the University of Zululand, is very important maybe to someone in their 50s, possibly much less so to someone who's 20 years old today. They can't credibly defend their history, but if they wanted to be politically relevant, was the word you used today, first of all, they would have to build real support outside of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, where they had support. It's not new. They had it in the 1980s in the hostels and so on. And they would have to move past this idea that you can just have different personalities recycling the same failed, exhausted, unoriginal, uninspiring ideas, and somehow magically that's going to attract people's attention. It's not. Most South Africans don't bother to vote. That is a really powerful statement, that people clearly don't see any inspiration in any of the parties on the ballot. The parties that are shaking things up, like MK, like Action SA, are not just repeating the old language. They're finding new things to say, in some cases very dangerous things. Action SA is a classic right-wing populist party. It's often Trumpian. But all over the world, electorates are not interested anymore in that kind of bland centrist language. They either want something that's clearly on the left, that's clearly on the side of the people as a whole. Just look at the UK, this incredible enthusiasm around Jeremy Corbyn's new party. 750,000 people signing up in a matter of weeks. It's extraordinary. But then you also get this massive surge to the right, that's cohered around Nigel Farage, a truly odious little man. This is what's happening all over the world. And South Africa doesn't have a credible left party, doesn't have any left party, really. We've got these sort of authoritarian nationalist options, and we've got the centre. We've got the right-wing populism of Action SA and the Patriotic Alliance. But the IFP, doesn't position itself in any way that brings any novelty. It's true that in KwaZulu-Natal, you will meet people who, looking at the venality and corruption and violence into which the ANC descended there, how things were when Zandile Gumede was the mayor, see the IFP as more reliable, less corrupt, see them as conservative in a kind of, socially conservative in a kind of moderate way. It's true that their support is increasing, that they did much better in the last election, national election, that they had for a long time. It's true that they're doing well in by-elections, but this is incremental regional growth. It doesn't make them a significant contender to take the space nationally as the ANC continues to implode.
Maybe more in your area of interest at an actual intellectual level. Do you see them as a major contributor to politics theory in the country, even in practice?
Look, there's a period when in the national liberation struggle, South African politics had really remarkable intellectuals. You think of Governor Mbeki or Ruth First. We had a president who was famously intellectual. A president who, could extemporize with history and philosophy, and I'm talking about Thabo Mbeki. we still had some serious intellectuals in the ANC until relatively recently. I've just come back from Malaysia. I was at a conference there in Kuala Lumpur on how to build a more just economy for the global south. Rob Davies was there. He's highly respected in those circles internationally. He's a serious guy. You know, Polokwane was many things, but one of them was a revolt against the intellectuals, as you see in the US with the sort of Trumpian contempt for ideas and learning. And we've never really recovered that. I can't name a single really serious intellectual in a single political party in this country, with the possible exception of Rise Mzansi, that has an extremely intelligent leader who was a brilliant editor. But as gifted as he is, he doesn't think out the box. And Rise Mzansi says the same stuff as all of those other liberal parties, perhaps because, like all of them, it's backed by the same set of small white billionaires.
Prof, let's leave it there. Much appreciated, and thanks for coming on. That's Professor Richard Pithouse, a research fellow at the Global Center for Advanced